Hi there. It's Steve. How are you doing? How are you feeling? Tell me about your feelings. Anyway, that was gonna get real obnoxious real fast. It's Steve. It's 60 degrees. It's over 60 degrees outside for the first time since like freaking October. At least it feels that way. Now, granted, I'm doing this video like almost a month before I'm posting it. So, with it being April 10th, 2021 today, having it be 60 degrees might not be so shocking, but it's still early March. But for our sake, don't tell anybody. It's April 10th, 2021 today. And y'all know what that means. Another day, another story. So we're going back just a hair over a century. It's April 10th, 1919. The Baker family, just another family in the city, they lived on Overton Street, which only exists on the west side of the Willamette River in northwest Portland, an area that's pretty much where the neighborhoods of Nob Hill and Slabtown all kind of come together. And you know, it's got a smattering of, you know, residences there, but, you know, the big Good Samaritan Hospital is nearby. And you're starting to, you go just a little bit more north and you start getting real industrial. It was probably more residential back in 1919, as most parts that are heavily commercial today in Portland were predominantly residential going that far back. But the Baker family lived on Overton Street in what is today northwest Portland. And I say the family, I only know for certain that there was a mother and a daughter. So maybe I should skew it that direction. There was a mother and a daughter living on Overton Street. And the mother, whose first name was never given, Ma Baker, she had a 4-year-old daughter named Faye Baker. And on April, it probably would have been April 9th, 1919, because, you know, usually stories are reported the following day. Faye, little 4-year-old Faye, vanished. You know, a parent's worst nightmare. They suddenly step outside and their child's nowhere to be found. You call out to them a little passively, they don't show up. You call out a little bit more firmly, they don't show up. And next thing you know, panic and fear overtakes you. And this is 1919. This is over 100 years ago, and this is an era where, you know, back then, little kids were, you know, very much allowed to kind of roam free. You know, you could be 3-4 years old and your parents would let you sit and play in your front yard without necessarily monitoring you. They would, you know, little kids would be sent on errands on their own. You know, one of the most tragic examples of this is Barbara Holtzman. It's a famous unsolved murder case in Portland. Barbara Holtzman lived in North Portland, and she was sent by her family. She was 5 years old. She was sent by her family to go pick up some meat at the market, and she never returned. And her, you know, dead, tortured remains were found, left stuffed under a bed in a rooming house in what is no longer, the building no longer stands today, but it would have been right smack in the middle of what is kind of historic Old Town Albina. And to this day, that was 1911 when that happened, and to this day, there was numerous suspects, but to this day, we don't know who actually did it. And one of the biggest issues there was the woman who was kind of the landlady, or at least was presiding over the house. Every time a new suspect came along, she would give more, like most of the time she would give a definitive identification. There was like 4 different guys that she was like, that's the man. And then it would turn out to not be him. And she'd be like, oh, well, anyway, bring me another guy and I'll identify him. So it was fairly normal for parents to kind of, you know, to a degree, let their kids kind of have independence and roam free. And it was not as common back then for people to, you know, come along and snatch up other people's children. And, you know, as plenty of random adults and random strangers could go by the house with some kids hanging out in front and be like, oh, hello children, how are you today? And that was, normal. That guy wasn't deemed creepy, and most of the time the guy wasn't creepy. I'm saying that as there's a group of kids wandering around on their own over here, messing up my audio. So that seems to have been the case in Faye Baker's story. She was just another little kid that was, off playing by herself. And when her mom suddenly realized she wasn't, close by, wasn't responding to her, calls, she got panicked, and she went to talk to some local children that played with her kid. And, the worst of all possibilities, these little kids told Miss Baker that they saw a man pick up Faye and just walk away with her. So again, we're dealing with like, oh my God, like the worst case scenario. Some random stranger came along and scooped my child up and disappeared with her. And I don't know where he's at. We don't know who this person is. It was just described as a man. Came and scooped her up and took her away. So Miss Baker is immediately on the phone. She's calling the police. She's just like, please, somebody help me find my daughter. And the police spread out quick. They scour the area. They're looking for anybody of any real suspicion, anybody who just doesn't quite look right, because they're gonna question anybody they deem necessary if it's going to lead to them finding this little girl and finding her alive. And again, this kind of stuff was not as common back then. So it was kind of hard to say exactly what a given random person who scooped up a child might do. But it had to be believed because you had these other little kids telling the girl's own mother, yeah, we saw a guy pick her up and walk away with her. And this is an area where there was lots of train lines, and there's Union Station was, a little ways away, but you could get there relatively quickly. There was a lot of avenues for someone who, say, abducted a child to not just escape that immediate neighborhood, but just escape that whole general area. And I don't know what this person's end game was, if they had a car, because it was 1919. It's not too out of the norm to think this person didn't have a car. All those thoughts have to be going through people's minds. Like, we're going to search this immediate area, but we may have to stretch it out and search a lot more other areas and spread the message all around town. Have you seen this girl? Have you seen this girl with a man? Have you seen a man who maybe looks like this? There was no description given for the man who scooped Faye up in the article. And it would have been hard for these, presumably other 4-year-old kids to give a real definitive description of this guy. And so the police are searching frantically for hours. Miss Baker is sitting at home, frantic, wondering if her whole universe is about to crumble apart. And then she gets word that Faye has been discovered. Faye Baker, this little kid, was discovered fast asleep underneath the porch of a neighbor's house. The police scooped her out, pulled her to safety, and she had no idea that this great big hullabaloo was going on about what had happened to her. She was just asleep under a neighbor's porch, which is it's interesting in so many different ways. Like, how did she end up there? Was she actually, these kids say that a guy scooped her up and walked away with her. But then ultimately she's found sleeping, under a neighbor's porch not too far from her own house. She was out of sight, so it did take a while to find her, but she was stumbled upon. So how did she get there? And what are the circumstances surrounding a man who would have abducted this girl and then, like, what, took her a short distance from her house and then put her under a porch or put her near a neighbor's house, and she was just like, nap time, and she just climbed under a porch where it was nice and dark and just fell asleep. Like, what were the circumstances surrounding this? And now that I'm recording this, I almost, like, usually stories like this kind of pop up in the news and then disappear. You know, once they find the kid's all right, nobody's really going to do a follow-up, so there's probably not really any follow-up news articles to be found. But I kind of want to look this story up just to see if there was a follow-up done, specifically asking Faye Baker, like, asking her side of the story. What happened? Did a guy grab you? Did you just, like, were you just playing with your friends and then you just got tired? You're like, well, I could go home and sleep in my bed, but I'm gonna go sleep under the neighbor's porch instead. It was so bizarre. And if some guy grabbed her and abducted her, why was she asleep later? I mean, again, I don't know how many hours passed between the acknowledgement of her mother that her daughter was missing to when Faye Baker's body was found. It could have been several hours. It could have been 2, 3, 4 hours. That's another detail that wasn't given. But it's just, it's such a strange set of circumstances. Under what circumstances does a story conclude with some local children in town tell a mother that they saw a man walk away with her kid, and then a short while later, that same child is found sleeping underneath a neighbor's porch? And by all accounts, like, it wasn't the neighbor that lived in that house that was responsible for taking her. So how did we get from A to Z in this case? How did we get from Faye Baker disappearing to Faye Baker being found? That's a question I don't have an answer to. And as I'm doing this video, because usually I try to keep it focused like this, just one article for one day in time, but I'm gonna at least take a look through some old newspapers, look up, you know, Faye Baker's name, look up where she lived, and see if I can find any follow-up so that maybe we can get her side of the story. So, a strange little case, a bizarre little caper, a situation that leaves some questions kind of unanswered, blocking this guy from pulling into the driveway. So yeah, when I saw the title to the story, which of course gave all the pertinent details away, and it's one of those situations where it's such a horrible thing to experience, and it's so frightening, the disappearance of one's child. And very seldom do situations like this, a child who goes missing for, you know, a few hours, possibly several hours, that they aren't going to be found by chance, or someone isn't going to find the person responsible and somehow get the child away from them, or that child is not going to end up dead. Is pretty unlikely that the end game to a story like this is the child's going to be found sleeping under a neighbor's porch. I'm curious if that's ever been the case at any other time in all the annals of history regarding little kids that went missing and were, you know, later found to be safe and sound, or in Faye Baker's case, sleeping soundly. So I couldn't, you know, with how traumatizing it is, it's almost an uplifting story in the end, because your heart rate starts going like, oh no, not a missing child case. And then it turns out the kid was, by all accounts, okay. I think she was fine. She was sleeping. She was probably annoyed to be woken up by the police. Like, what are all you flatfoots doing here? I don't know. Maybe I don't know. Maybe her mom hated the police. Maybe she learned the term flatfoot at a young age. I don't know. I don't know those intimate details. Ladies out here lawn mowing. What do they do next? You got some kayaks over here. Everybody is just getting jazzed for the nice weather. Well, get jazzed and be safe. Because I really hope by the time this video goes live in a month, COVID cases haven't spiked through the ceiling again. But I'm trying to end this on a high note, so we won't talk about that. But one thing I will talk about is my gratitude that you joined me today to watch my video. I also want to talk a little bit about the ways you can help my channel by liking, sharing, subscribing, hitting up my Patreon if you want to help me out that way. It makes it a lot easier for me to do what I do, and I'm always posting new things there to give you some bang for your buck. The link to my Patreon is in the description to this video, as well as the links to my Facebook and Instagram pages that are closely related to the content that I am producing both for this channel as well as my primary channel, Steve the Amateur Historian. And all that said, this has been Steve, and I'll see you tomorrow.